Good morning and happy birthday. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm going to talk to you today about something that's very close to my heart, and it's something that I propose that we focus on rethinking. That's really what I want to talk about today, and it comes down to this very simple comparison. There we are. How much of the behavior that we study, that we describe, that we seek to understand is the result of independent choice by independent individuals, and how much of it is the result of social influence? It's a very simple question. And what we're going to do is just have a little show of hands at the start here. Those of you who'd say the majority of it sits on the left there with individuals making decisions for themselves. Show your hands now, please. Just a few. How much of it do you think is the result of social influence, primarily? Hey, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. What the reason why I want to talk about this today is because most of our practices assume that independent choice is the source of most of the behavior that we study. Let me give you an example. The consumer. We describe individual people. We draw samples of individuals to represent a population of individuals. We don't look between them. We look at what goes on behind their eyes and between their ears. We ask them only about themselves. We don't ask them about other people primarily. And when we do communication, we look to impact on the stuff up here, on individuals. We worry in advertising terms on what advertising does to people, not what people do with each other with the advertising. And for me, that's a really big opportunity. And I thought to make the case for social influence, I'd introduce you, or reintroduce almost everybody, I guess, in the room, to the Queen of the Lower East Side. This is the late Estelle Reiner, who, for me, produced the highlight of the Rob Reiner movie from 22 years ago, When Harry Met Sally. Now, you'll all know the scene. The movie being about two young New Yorkers, young Manhattanites on the dating scene, and the debate is whether or not men and women can have friendship without the great beast of men's sexual desire getting in the way. There's the scene that everyone remembers from this movie is directly before Estelle's appearance, one and only appearance in the movie. And you'll see Meg Ryan and Billy Crystal in Katz's Deli, sitting across the table from each other, and Meg makes all these strange noises and whimpers and so on. And when she stops banging her head on the table, the camera pans around the room to reveal Estelle, the woman at the next table. And what does Estelle say? Sorry? I'll have what she's having. I'll have what she's having. Ladies and gentlemen, that should be our mantra. That's the key to understanding most of the consumer behavior that we study. And that's the thing that we in the research world have to get to grips with. How do we get inside, I'll have what she's having, rather than I'm choosing this because it's significantly better and I've considered the other options, which is how the economists and the psychologists, and indeed most of our culture, presumes, and how your mom, when you were growing up, presumed that you did things. Did she ever say to you, if your friends ran under a bus, would you do too? The answer, of course, the correct answer to give her, the one she was looking for, was no, of course not. The truth was very much nearer, yes, if they were doing it, I'm going to do it too. I'll have what she's having. I'll have what she's having, ladies and gentlemen, is the heart, the key to unlocking a lot of what we see. But unfortunately, our practices, both in marketing and market research, point the other way. The social science is really clear about this. If you look across the piece, social influence is really central to all kinds of behavior. The stuff that we think might be the most independent, stuff like names, the names we give our children. You'd want that to be unique and special and so on. But names follow fashions, exactly the same way that the clothes we wear do, or the haircuts we do. Names follow fashions. The work of Alex Bentley in the UK and Jonah Berger at Wharton here in the US have demonstrated this again and again and again. the dog breeds that we choose. Dog breeds, you think that would be an independent choice because I prefer a big, well, not a small one, a cute little spaniel, maybe versus a Doberman, I don't know. But no, dog breeds follow the same patterns. Where we choose to live, urban geographers have known forever that cities grow by people moving to share a neighborhood with people who are like them. Things that we might think are really central to who we are, things like our ideas of beauty and attractiveness, used to be thought as biologically predetermined, but they're not. We learn them from each other. Lots of good cross-cultural studies, as opposed to studying undergraduate psychology students, have revealed that kind of stuff. So, and even the idea of fairness. There's a great game called the Great Game, which you give psychologists and anthropologists use this around the world to understand what fairness is. And let's say I gave to Bob here at the front, I gave you $10, Bob, and you could keep as much of that $10 as you want if you manage to make an offer to the lady next to you, and she accepts a portion of that. So I give you 10, let's say you make an offer of $9, that you keep the $9, she gets the 1. And that's the kind of offer that we find regularly in Anglo-Saxon cultures like the US and the UK and Northern Europe. But in other cultures, which are communitarian, fairness like that, the idea of what's fair, is completely reversed. So some great work by an anthropologist called Joe Henrich shows that, in fact, it starts at 50-50 in sort of communitarian whaling societies, hunter-gatherer societies. That 50-50 is the opening bid. And quite a lot of the bids are up to, you get 90 and I keep the 10. How do you feel about that, Bob? It's not, right, okay. Anyway, so the science tells us that. My point really is that a lot of our tools for understanding the behavior, the ideas and the embedded in practice, hide this stuff from us. I'm going to show you something now which is based on the excellent work by Nick Christakis and James Fowler, who are two American health researchers. A great book of theirs from 2 years ago called Connected. And Nick gave me this slide, this animation himself. What they did is they went back to the famous Framingham, Massachusetts longitudinal health study. And they went back to individual patient files, and those individual patient files had, for once, the social measures on them as well as the health indicators, as well as how much you weigh, how many pounds you weigh, what your heart condition is, how much exercise you take, so on, all that stuff. The other dimension being how many friends you have, how often do you see your friends, and who those friends are. So what they're able to do was to actually reconstruct the activity of a whole social community, more than 3,000 individuals over the 32 years. And what you'll see here is basically, it looks like a sort of a topographic network that moves. The yellow dots represent obese individuals. And you'll see that the obese individuals increase in size and increase in number, and also go to the heart of the social network over the course of these 32 years. Just have a quick look at that now. So more and more yellow dots, bigger and bigger yellow dots, and closer to the heart of the network. Their calculations from this, from having this social dimension in their data set, suggests that it's between 60 and 65% more likely that you as an individual will become obese if someone of your immediate connections does. Obvious implications of that: one, your mom was right. Don't hang out with those bad guys. Pick up bad habits. But more importantly for all of us, what happens to me matters to all the people that I know and to the people that they know. What happens to them actually matters to me as well. Things as I would imagine, I was always told that my rather large physique was the result of a combination of a slow metabolism. That's a good excuse, isn't it? A slow metabolism and a fast pie hand. And it's just the people I hang out with, I'm afraid. We don't take enough exercise, we eat and drink a bit too much. There you go. So even something as obvious as that, which we think of as the result of, and government and social policy people focus on this as if it was an individualist thing, but it's not. I've looked at any number of consumer markets in recent years, and I've got to tell you that consumer markets show the signs of social influence in the data that we all have, that we all see every day, that we collect, that we analyse. And the most important, most obvious sign of this is the diffusion curves. Those of you who remember your Marketing Science 101 will recognise the shape of the independent curve on the left. That's when everyone here adopts something immediately without learning from other people, and the more symmetrical, smoother classic adoption curve on the right. Classic adoption curve has, as Everett Rogers showed, about 2.5% is about right of people doing what other buyers are not doing. So that's independent action. 97.5% of people in a traditional classic adoption curve are doing what other people have already done or are doing around them. It's a really good sign that social influence is there. And we see this. This is what most brands and most products and most categories, this is how they spread. There are other signs, which are statistical signs, which are worth looking at, but for me, that's a really good check. Again and again and again, whether it's consumer packaged goods, whether it's services, whether it's financial services or other services, whether it's online or off, we see these patterns of diffusion again and again and again. So our markets are fundamentally social is the conclusion I draw. But also, if you work in marketing communications, you're concerned about how ideas spread through populations, we see the same patterns again. I don't know if anyone picked up this story from Ohio, a small town called Monroe, Ohio, last year. There was a church which had this fantastic statue of 80 foot high, I think, and it was named the church Touchdown Jesus as a result. It got struck by lightning, June 15th, I think, last year. And so that's what you see on the right there, is what's left of the church, or left of the statue. And the patterns that we see this is just the Twitter feed, the patterns we see show those two different curves really clearly. Same thing for Michael Jackson's death, the same thing for the outbreak of war in Libya, for the tsunami in Japan. Wow, a spike when everyone hears the news together, or lots of people hear the news together, and then a smoother but bigger area under that curve there for social learning. And just to show you how that works, I'd like to see if we can do something together to see the importance, to demonstrate the importance of social influence in diffusing things. So could everybody please stand up? Everybody please stand up. Thank you very much. Right, I want you to find someone immediately close to you who's about the same height as you. This won't hurt a bit. I promise you this won't hurt a bit. Okay, now, here's the thing. I want you to go up to that person and I want you to turn and face them. If you've got a chair between you, I suggest you push the chair under the table. If you've got a coffee cup in your hand, put it down. Okay, so now, if you're a Brit, this is going to be really tricky. If you're a Brit, it's going to be really tricky because it might mean some physical intimacy. So apologies in advance. Could you put your arms at your side like that? And then bring your arms up like that. So your elbows tucked in? That's great. Now, could you hold the other person's wrists? That's very good. What I want you to do now is a competition, and there will be advanced copies of my next book for the two people who get their partner off the ground the most times. Because that's the objective of this game. Get your partner off the ground the most times. Get your partner off the ground the most times in the next 20 seconds. Go! That's very good, very good. Now, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If you'd like to sit down just for a moment. Big round of applause for that. So here's what we see in that game. And I've played this game with thousands and thousands of people in different parts of the world. We normally see some people do some wrestling. I don't know if anyone was a wrestler at high school or at college, that wrestling thing going on. I did this in Scandinavia a couple of years ago, and someone got thrown across the room. Shows you the Viking spirit is not dead. We see some wrestling. That's a bit like when we try and make people do stuff in marketing terms. And then what happens is somebody or other, and there were some people here in the middle there who I saw very early jumping up and down. Most of us just stand there and go, hmm? And then what happens? And then they go, oh, that thing, right, do that then. In other words, I'll have what she's having. It's not a complicated challenge, it's not difficult, you know, right? But that answer always emerges, and somebody always comes to it, but that somebody isn't terribly important, because somebody always will. But how it spreads around the room, and ARF, you did very well. That was, for me, less than 5 seconds to reach 50% of the room. So very well done. That bit, the seeing other people do stuff, is important. Estelle at the next table in Katz's Diner is like all of us. We're all at the next table from somebody else. And there's always somebody else at the next table from us, because we, ladies and gentlemen, are a social species. We couldn't have chimps or gorillas of this number in this room without bloodshed. We're able to live together and we learn together. And indeed, one of the things that the social scientists are now suggesting is that our success as a species is because we are so good at being together and learning from each other, not because we're so smart individually. Anyway, so this is the question, really. Where do you think the juice is for shaping human behavior? Is it behind the eyes of the individual? Is it maybe in the deep metaphors, as Jerry Saltman has suggested? Maybe it's in the brain of the individual. Or is it between people, in the space between people? Maybe that's the space we need to start looking at, whether we're marketers or market researchers. Now, to help me explore that question, I've got 2 leading practitioners in the field to come and join me. So, gentlemen, if you'd like to come out first of all. Domenico Vitali is one of the US's leading account planning practitioners. He runs a business called People, Ideas and Culture and sits on the board of the Miami Ad School. And John Kearon, many of you will know, is the CEO and founder of BrainJuicer, an innovative research agency. And so what I want to do is explore these questions about how you get social influence, how you get around social influence, how do you understand it, what do you do with it, with these 2 gentlemen here. And so welcome. Thank you very much, gentlemen. So first thing to say, and this often happens when we first discuss this view of human beings and human behaviour, is I don't like to think of myself like that. So how do you feel about it, John?
Well, on a personal level, what you're talking about in herd behaviour has to be true because I own a pair of Crocs. They are a fashion disaster. How can anyone actually in their independent mind buy these things? But I own a pair of Crocs. And as you might be able to tell from the voice, I was led astray into karaoke last night. It's like, again, why would anyone do that in front of peers and friends?
And clients. Fantastic.
And clients, yeah.
So bigger boys made you do it?
They made me. It wasn't me. I wasn't there.
Excellent. Now, Domenico, well, how do you feel about
personal level? Well, I think it really makes me feel free, to tell you the truth, because you know, I have been, these slides, by the way, they are.
What's wrong, right?
You know, for the past 20 years or so, work-wise, it's been really, really hard to actually do what doesn't work, fundamentally. So the freedom that comes from the thinking that everything is based on participation in the social dynamic is actually what has shaped the past 5-6 years of my life.
Oh, right.
To be honest, that's why the company is called People, Ideas and Culture and not Vitale, which would be, again, a statement of individualism, which I find ridiculous. But
how did it play as you, because you were born in Italy, right? You're a New Yorker now, but you were born in Italy.
In Italy, you see, I think that the concept of individualism is a very Anglo-Saxon one.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at Japan, unfortunately, these days. The Japanese culture is based fundamentally on groups and the sacrifice or the joys that come from groups and social dynamics. And Italy is very, very similar to that, even though there are individual expressions of really what is herd behavior. And being the country even smaller, those groups are fewer, and therefore they're more evident. I remember in the 80s when I was growing up, there was a group called the Paninai, which is basically the people used to eat McDonald's in Italy, right? Which to begin with is insanity, right? And we're eating McDonald's, and they were wearing these Montclair jackets in the early 80s, and they were called the Paninai, and that's what they used to do. And those type of herd behaviors were present and still are present throughout the country continuously with an acceptance to them.
Right.
After all, it is the glory of Rome, isn't it?
Yeah, it is the glory of Rome, yes. When in Rome, do as
when in Rome, do as the Romans. That's right.
Excellent. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm struck by that cultural comparison because I came to this area actually by doing lots of work with other cultures, by working in, for example, in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America. And I found that I was the only one who seemed fundamentally to think that people acted independently, first and foremost. You know, I said, okay, there's a bit of social influence, stuff like teenagers who don't know any better, and dumb people, and you know, and maybe those people on the interweb, you know,
and
that's all social. What's that?
And Berlusconi.
And Berlusconi, yeah. But it seems other cultures have a very different view, right? That's...
Yeah, I mean, you know, the marketing was created in an Anglo-Saxon context, right, in the 60s. So the idea of persuasion and the ability to change people's mind, therefore, the hidden persuaders, etc., the Pavlovian approach to the fact that we can change people's mind if we keep feeding them something, is actually contrary to what Aristotle, from a classic tradition, used to say about persuasion, which was about creating common ground. That was his definition, the art of creating common ground. So I actually feel that the concept of individualism as applied to marketing is actually very divisive between brands and consumers because there is an assumption that they're there for us to sell them and consume something instead of bringing them along. So.
Yeah, the consumer.
That consumer.
They exist to...
Exist for you, just wait,
whereas they're people, right, who live in a world of other people. John, let's talk a bit practical stuff now. You've done a lot of experimentation and innovation in the we research space. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, you and I have done quite a bit on this, and we've framed it, you know, the me to we research, because the central dogma of market research is that you must ask me about me, you know, especially quantitative. You know, it's kind of like, you can't ask me about my friends, please don't talk about anyone else, just talk about yourself. And it's like, it's not that that's wrong, it's just what's the possibility of, if we're a social animal, asking people what they notice about other people, what they actually might predict about other people. So the first application was predictive markets, the wisdom of crowds. I mean, I think James Surowiecki's probably spoken, you know, at this event, and it was his, you know, his capturing of that thinking that actually, as a social species, we're really good at predicting other people and what they might do. And the IEM, the Iowa Electronic Market, was the statistic that got me, which is, you know, over 600 elections, a crowd of 500 people buying and selling shares in who's going to win the election were more accurate than the most accurate poll. Now, polling is where we started. I mean, that's the you know, the origin of quantitative research, and it's all about finding the right target audience, scientific sampling, and yet 500 people, random crowd, buying and selling shares in who they think's going to win. So, in other words, just predicting what the crowd, you know, are going to do, are more accurate than the most accurate poll. And that to me was really striking.
Yeah.
And we've done a lot of work translating that into concept testing and the like, and have huge evidence that it just works. And it works when you're predicting what others are going to do, so a democratic way. What it doesn't work for is predicting the gold price in 6 months' time, or anything that's a sort of abstract, complex, you know, just sort of complex thing. It's not magic. What it is it's humans, it's the social animals.
So what you're saying is that the predictive markets approach that you've been working on works because it's people looking at other people's likely behaviour rather than looking at themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's interesting.
And it works in the most unlikely. I mean, the torture test was for a pharmaceutical company, where they normally talk to specialist doctors. Yeah?
Yeah.
And we just got a crowd of ordinary consumers to basically look at the same concepts.
Right.
And 3 times out of 3 separate tests, they picked out the same winners in the same order as the specialists.
Right.
which was a bit of a shock for everyone, frankly. But because actually they could predict how people would, what people would be interested in, it worked.
Great.
And if I can build just very quickly, you know, just happened, every time you do a focus group, there is always somebody that says, well, this won't work for me, but it will work for everybody else, you know, but me, I'm not a marketing receptive person, you know, advertising doesn't work with me or any of that. That's because we don't like to admit, it's almost socially unacceptable to admit that we do things based on input of other people.
Yeah.
And that's why there is so much resistance also in the practitioners of this. And that social, you know, I mean, the guys who were sitting here 2 minutes ago from Foursquare and Groupon wouldn't exist if we were all individuals.
Dominica, there's a lovely example. Apparently in Sweden, they did this study, and 50% of male Swedish drivers reckoned that they were in the top 10% of good drivers, best drivers. And then they repeated this in France. I don't know if we have anyone from France here, but 90% of French men believe that they are in the top 10% of lovers. You know, and it's that sort of little things that we won't talk about ourselves, but we're happy to talk about other people. Yeah,
it's true.
Interesting. So, how does this play out in your practice then, as a communications brand company?
We really talk about participation and not persuasion. Unfortunately, that word has been co-opted by what I think is a lot of waste. So we really try to spark social dynamics. So I see my job when a client hires us to create a lot of sparks within society, within specific groups and target audiences to accelerate communication.
Right.
So what that means is to have people participate along with you in the communication itself. If you think of communication as a product that has value for people, that becomes a lot easier to actually start to create. So in other words, I'm not as interested in how am I changing somebody's mind, but how am I actually including somebody into a much larger participation in the communication. That has a few implications because, of course, I mean, technology is allowing all of this to happen so easily. But also television can have the same choice. I mean, this is something that has happened for the past 30 years. We're just now framing it, understanding it better, and using it to our advantage. And more importantly, it has a business advantage for clients because it multiplies their budgets.
Yeah.
See, most agencies in the past were fearful of saying, you don't need $200 million. And you actually don't need $200 million to do anything anymore. You really don't. It's just thievery. So you need what you need in order to spark and get people to react. Today, you do have the right type of mindset and the right type of companies that understand that it's not about how much, but how well you can engage people with your communication. And that really does change the dynamic. You know,
it does. It makes me think, I showed the chart just before about touchdown Jesus and the big spike. Yeah. That seems to me where the old model of communications focusing, let's do something to people, whereas you're much more concerned about how can I curate people coming together, having a conversation, being excited about, and spread that out as long as possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In other words, if I could get, I don't even want to talk about our work just so that it's not self-serving, but for example, Axe in the UK with the click, you know, with the thing, they got 4 million people to use a clicker, you know, for how many people a girl will look at a boy, you know, or the subservient chicken, just as an example, or literally anything that's been successful over the past few years. In fact, in Cannes, I think the beauty of what has happened in the creative world is that Cannes, by creating the titanium and integrated awards, have moved the focus from individual communication to really participation.
Great.
And all the ideas that win there are ideas that have amazing behavioral results.
Great.
Which is, if I may, I know I don't want to take time away from everything, but the major shift is from attitudinal to behavioral, which is another big no-no for advertising agencies because they don't want to be responsible for anything that is behavioral, right? It's always about tracking studies that tell us that somebody loves me 5% more. But what if I could get 1 million people to do something along with a client? How much more is that?
Yeah.
Right? So, and by the way, it's behavioral intention. It's Fishbein from the 70s, you know, so it's not something new. So it truly is a very different approach and perspective that is a little scarier, which is, I guess, what new companies like mine love, because the scarier the better.
Exactly. Great, thank you. We've just got a minute or so left. just a couple of thoughts. What's next in this space for you?
Well, there are a couple of things. I think mass ethnography, because ethnography has been talked about a lot, and people, and clients get huge value from it, but it's restricted, very professional. So something that if you remember, we did in Newcastle in the UK, which is the capital city of binge drinking in the UK.
Okay, the UK's national sport, right?
It's the UK's national sport, binge drinking. By the way, we're going to introduce it for the Olympics in 2012, because then we can guarantee a gold medal.
And karaoke afterwards.
And karaoke afterwards. And what we did is we got just a group of 40 people who just respondents, to go out one weekend with a brief, which is watch what's going on. Just watch on our behalf. And I think what we did, which was key, was to give them a professional ethnographer's report. So they kind of had a sense of what the end result looked like. And they were brilliant. We got these really, very acutely observed kind of stories. And one of the things that they noticed was that in the UK on Saturday nights, there's always a fancy dress. There's a stag night or a hen night. And someone, there's always one group, and I think the group that this particular person was Oompa Loompas. So there was a group of people dressed as Oompa Loompas, and basically what they noticed was that everyone around the group were drinking, and they were drinking faster because they were embarrassed, but actually everyone around them seemed to be drinking slightly faster and slightly more, and it's because it was copied behavior, like the game you played earlier on, where everyone sort of... And so actually, over the course of a night, and over the course of a Saturday night, there's a speed of drinking which is almost provoked by the fancy dress. And we've shared this with a couple of drinks clients, and they'd never heard that. I mean, it was genuinely...
So if you're a social policy person concerned about alcohol abuse, that's good news.
Yeah.
It's a way, an insight you didn't know, and so there's some things you can do there. But if you're a brand who wants to sell more,
Yep.
it's another way to do it.
Yep.
So we're out of time now. So Domenico, last thoughts from you. What's the next bit?
I think the next bit has to come from this room, actually,
right.
Because I think creatively and strategically we're getting there, but there is not great ways to measure this for our clients, because all the efforts have been on the other side of the equation. And if this room actually cracks that, I think the whole world will be better off, first and foremost, clients.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Domenico. Thank you, ARF.